Growing up in Harlem?
Yeah, what was it like to grow up in a musical family?
Well, actually, it was not a musical family. I grew up in a very normal family. My father was a merchant seaman. My mother was a housewife. Had an older brother who was in the Air Force, and a younger brother who was a student. And somewhere along the way, I've always had a musical inclination from childhood. I started, my father wanted me to play the trumpet when I was 9, but I didn't like the way it made trumpet players' lips look, so I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I guess it was seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan that kind of made me say, I could do that, And my father bought me a guitar when I was, I asked my father to buy me an electric guitar, and he said, I'll tell you what. And he bought me a very inexpensive Spanish guitar. And he said, you learn how to play that, I'll buy you an electric guitar. And true to his word, he went away for like 6 months. When he came back, he was saying, play an A chord, play a G chord, play a H chord. I said, there's no H chord. He said, okay, you learn. And true to his word, he took me down to 48th Street and bought my first electric guitar.
How'd you go from there to playing sports and stuff?
That's a long story. You familiar with the Sparks part of the story?
Yeah, I read a little bit about that.
Yeah, the long and short of it is that I and some neighborhood fellas, we would hear each other playing. As you walk by the building, you'd hear this keyboard player playing, or you'd hear the bass player playing, and we sort of gelled together because they were looking for an ethnic group to play in the movie Up the Down Staircase, to be the band at the high school dance. And we went and we got together and we had one rehearsal, we learned 2 songs, and a week later we were on the set at Harran High School doing Up the Down Staircase. And because of that, we signed with MGM Records, and we got to tour with Jerry Butler and the Young Rascals. And at the same time, I wanted to learn to play the piano, and there was a local neighborhood music company, Avant Productions, owned by a fellow named Al Avant. And they were right down the street from the Apollo Theater. And he said I could play the piano all day. And I basically taught myself to play the piano.
Wow.
And along with it, in return for that, he said, but you got to rehearse my groups. So I had the great experience of playing piano for about 10 different acts, which, it was a constant learning experience, and I have to learn new chords every day for this one and that one. But a lot of it for me is just natural. I've just always been a natural musician.
Wow. So you pretty much self-taught music then?
Excuse me?
So you're pretty much self-taught music and theory, like that?
Yes, I always joke about having gone to Catholic school and having sung in the choirs, and then later on in high school being in the glee club and learning how to sight read in the glee club. A lot of it was just applying one situation versus another one and building on it. The whole musical arrangement thing, like I said, at Avon's Productions, they gave me a shot to do an arrangement for a group. Well, there was a group called the Carlettes, Carletts. Actually, Bobby Robinson signed the group to Capitol Records in 1967, I believe. But I did the arrangements on that record. It was a rhythm section and 4 horns. That's the most I had ever arranged. And the big jump happens when I had found Black Ivory, and I was taking the record around, and when I got to Perception Today Records, they needed an arranger for a commercial they were doing. It was a Welch's grape juice commercial, and so Terry Phillips said, "You're an arranger, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Great, you got the gig." Now, what I didn't know until the next moment was that the commercial was going to be 14 strings and 10 horns and kettle drums and a harp and French horns and all this huge stuff. And mind you, I had never done anything but like a 4-piece horn arrangement. But my group, the Sparks, we had played in a local show called Listen My Brother at the Apollo Theater. Matter of fact, Luther Vandross was in that group, Listen My Brother. And my band played background. I mean, we backed up the play, and it was a local play at the Apollo, and they wound up recording the song for Sesame Street. So Luther Vandross's first recording was actually one of my songs. And it was season 1, episode 2 of Sesame Street, if you can ever find that. I've seen it on YouTube, but the point of it is that I had access to the Apollo Theater, and Pete Long, who was married to Loretta Long, who wound up on Sesame Street, Pete would let me sit in the middle of the orchestra, Reuben Phillips Orchestra, on rehearsal day. Like once a week, all the new acts that were coming in would have a dress rehearsal in the basement of the Apollo, and Reuben would let me pass out the music to the musicians, and we would sit. I would actually sit in the middle of the horn section, and that allowed me to hear the instrumentation from a different perspective, and I could read along with the musicians. So I did all that crash course just to do the commercial, and the Welch's commercial was a big success, and that led to Black Ivory eventually.
Wow. Okay. Peter is in the room, right?
Yes, he is.
Okay. Hi.
How you doing?
Hi. It's fine. How are you? I'm calling from LA. This is for West Village, and I was asking about history. I wanted to ask, where you were born, and when you were born, and what your childhood was like the musical upbringing you had.
Well, I was born in Athens, Georgia, 1940.
Where were you born?
Athens, A-S-T-H-E in Athens, Georgia,
In Georgia. Okay.
1940.
Okay. So what was your family like? Did you grow up learning music or playing music in your family, or what was it like back then?
Well, basically my family was religious people. My dad was a preacher, and my mother was a Christian. But my aunts and things, they was bootleggers. They had bootleg houses, so they had music around them all the time. Jukeboxes, they had big houses, that sold food, whiskey, stuff like that. And my aunt had all the singers come by there, because all the singers come to see my aunt. all the Richard, everybody's coming out. He's coming in, the Drifters, all, and like Fire Roy, these are old groups, you know, kids who know about these groups I'm talking about. And so I get to see all the musicians, Chuck Willis, Chick Willis, all those guys come out. Sam Cooke, and the Drifters, the Fire Royals, these are old groups back in the 40s and 50s. So by me seeing all these groups come out singing, I also like the music. So I used to go and get all the kids in the neighborhood on Saturday and Sunday, take them down to the arcade and record them. I was about 10 years old. And my cousins last night, they was trying to sing. They was little them, they wanted to be singing. But I was on the record company. I didn't want to be no singer, I was on the recording company. So what happened, when I got about 13, 14, I started recording kids in the neighborhood. You know, and dressing up the demo stuff around the community in Southern. And later on, when I got a little bigger, I started traveling, because I was doing different things, but I'm also listening to music. So when I came to Chicago, I went to VJ Records, and I asked them at VJ Records, because they discovered my label if I recorded somebody. So they laughed at me. So I went and got some money and recorded with somebody, and brought the master tape back, but it was gospel. And they liked it, so they put that on a label called National Records. That's around 1960. So they sold a few copies, and then I left in Chicago. I went to Detroit. That's where it was Billy Motown. But Motown was like it was just a little house, you know, a few little singers, and me and Barry Boy Dad was good friends. So I hung around Motown for a while, and so I came to New York, and that's when I met Bobby Robinson. And he had 5 Field Records. So I hung with him, and I went to record business from there. And I met Paul Women. That's how I went to record business, around 1962, 63.
Could you get closer to the mic? It's kind of hard to hear. Sorry. So as a child, always wanted to become a singer, working in production. So as a child, you wanted to always engineering and professions, like rather than being a singer or a frontman yourself.
No, I was going to be in the record business, record people. I was going on the label.
Okay, wow. So when you were that young in your teens and stuff?
Yeah, I was in the record business.
If you were recording your friends' bands from early on and stuff like that?
I can hear you.
So you were recording, your friends' stuff from early on?
Yeah, I was recording people in the neighborhood, taking that to arcade and recording them. Because they said like arcade, we could take people to and record them, like little demo records. So I would take everybody to the arcade and record them and make demo records.
Okay, so you had a tape recorder at home?
No, they had see down in the Atlanta places, they used to have arcades. It's like a museum where everybody go hang out there. Like kids do now, but they have a recording place, like small recording, like demo records. So I used to go down there and record everybody on Saturday and Sunday. They don't have that now. But you remember that Pepinese arcade?
Yeah, the machine, how much was it, a quarter or something like that?
Quarter, yeah, 15 cents quarter.
And the machine would record you for about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then spit out acetate recording.
Yeah, sounds pretty good, yeah.
So, talk about how you guys met and how you started working together. How did that happen?
Well, I met a friend named Lonnie Johnson, God bless his dead. And he had came to me because he had heard I was in the record business. So they put out my first record, GQ. But they went GQ then, they was the son of Dawson. And so he had heard about me because the record was making a little noise in New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, Washington. So Lonnie Johnson came to me and said, he had a friend that could produce and arrange and write music, named Patrick Adams. And he said that if he introduced me to Patrick, would I let him work with me? So I said, yeah. So he came to Patrick's house and introduced me to Patrick Adams. But Patrick there, he had lots of records, lots of tapes that had been released, so he played one song that I liked. He played the ESP. So I said, I like that. I said, I'll put that out. And so I put the record out in about 2 weeks. The record became a success. That's when Roulette Records called me, Mars Deep called me, about distributing worldwide. So I said, Patrick went in and made the deal for me. And that's that. That's what the next record I'm gonna put out. I'm not gonna make a deal. That's when we started doing Adam Fisker, Disco Juice, Space Out, all the big disco stuff. And it went on from there.
Yeah, I just want to say that at the time that Peter and I met, I had just finished being A&R director of Perception Today Records.
For what label?
Perception Today, which is where I did Black Ivory and I got to work with Dizzy Gillespie and Bobby Rydell, did the Wanda Robinson poetry album, did Astrid Gilberto, Bobby Hartman, Johnny Hartman. And we got into a royalty dispute, and so I decided to sit out the last 6 months of my contract. And I took a gamble. I figured the company could not function without me. And so it was like, if they're not going to pay me my royalties, I'm not going to work. And in sitting out that time, I never got paid my royalties, but the company went bankrupt. So at that point, I was starting my own production company, and I was stockpiling records. And that's when Lonnie put Peter and I together.
So you're doing production, you're producing Perception, and then so you had who's Lonnie?
Lonnie Johnson, he eventually was the owner of Scorp Jamai Records.
Okay.
The biggest record was Keep in Touch Body to Body. Melissa Morgan sang the lead on that.
Okay. So, were you already, before that, I'm sure you were doing that, were you already getting interested in disco and dance music and stuff? The kind of that shit stuff with Peter?
As an R&B songwriter, arranger, and producer, I was having a lot of success in that. And I actually was doing more work as an arranger at that point. For instance, Tony Sylvester, who founded The Main Ingredient, he was very hot at that moment as a producer. Which is how I got, I wrote Sister Sledge's, the title song on the first Sister Sledge album, Circle of Love, I wrote that. Tony would always hire me to do strings and horns on his productions. And I found that I could not break through as a producer. You go into a record company and say you want to produce something, and it's understandable that why would a label trust you with $100,000 to hire string and horn musicians and you had no track record? Peter, as a record company owner, did not place restrictions on what I was doing. For instance, the Atmosphere Strut album. Peter came up with some great ideas and said, well, can you do a record like this, or can you do something like that? But then he didn't sit there on top of me and say, don't do this and don't do that. Which is why he and I have always had a great relationship, because it's like I can read his mind sometimes. He's not afraid to throw stuff out at me, and I'm not afraid to do crazy stuff musically, because I know nobody's going to complain about it. So that freedom in producing, in writing, and then Peter's strength as a record company owner and promotion person is what has kept us together all the time.
So your first release on P&P was Cloud One's Atmosphere Drug?
Yeah.
Okay. Peter, did you mention maybe that ESP, or was that later?
What do you think?
Actually, I mean, ESP came before Atmosphere Struck, right?
Yeah.
But Atmosphere Struck,
What made all the time when I was promoting ESP, I was recording Atmosphere
yeah. Yeah, we were in the studio with Atmosphere Struck while ESP was out.
Nice. So you Patrick, your first record, it was actually My Baby's Got ESP?
Yeah, I would say that would have been the first one.
Okay. But like that one Atmosphere was like the more, or was where you really, where you really did your thing as a producer?
Yeah, because ESP, Lonnie managed the group Four Below Zero. But Atmosphere Struck, there were only 2 musicians on that album. Richard Tannenbaum, who later became part of my musical clique that we called the PA system. He was the drummer on that. And that entire album was done pretty much in a week. I would play the piano and Richard would accompany me on drums. And then I would lay the bass, guitar, whatever else.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, Atmosphere Struck is, the album is on me.
So you played pretty much all the instruments except the drums?
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible.
And the vocals, Venus Dotson did some of the vocals with me. Then on some crazy stuff like Spaced Out, I did that by myself.
Oh, wow.
You see, you will notice if you look at my discography, there are 2 sides to me. One side is the very formal, classical, orchestrated side, the musique stuff, the Herbie Mann stuff. Then there is the way out, almost, I guess you could say it's like avant-garde stuff. When you listen to the Atmosphere Struck album, if you think of the synthesizer as my voice, because I am not a great singer, never have been, never will be, but I know what a vocalist should do from having worked with so many great vocalists. So on the Atmosphere Struck album, on all of those tunes, the synthesizer was my voice. And then I would extend past that because, of course, a human voice can't do things that a synthesizer can do. So, you have that whole side of me with the Universal Robot Band, Bumblebees. The Freak album on Atlantic was sort of a merging of the 2. When you listen to Weekend is very orchestrated, but it's very synthy and crazy at the same time. So another thing became very important with P&P, like I said, with Peter giving me freedom, anytime I had an idea that I knew I could not take to Atlantic, I could not take to South Soul, I knew I could take it to Peter, and Peter would be supportive of me and go ahead and promote it. As crazy as it may have sounded, you know.
So P&P was where you could really go crazy to do what you wanted.
Exactly.
What was the, I mean, everybody knows P Records, and that besides just some of the melodies on songs like don't let, like we passing by or all the South One stuff. What was the synthesizer you using that?
Here we go with the nerds.
This is a nerdy magazine.
Yeah, okay. See, let me make this point. I hate to disappoint all of the aficionados, and I hate to disappoint manufacturers. I don't, sometimes you'll speak with a musician and he'll tell you, oh well, the XYZ 4000 is my favorite instrument. No. One of the fortunate things that happened in my life is in 1968, when the Sparks were recording some demos. We used a studio called Broadway Recording, which was on 52nd or 53rd and Broadway, above the Ed Sullivan Theater, on the 10th floor. And at the time, Robert Moog, Bob Moog, or Moog as some people say, had set up his incredible synthesizer setup. It covered a whole wall of the studio. There were oscillators and discombobulators and I actually had the good fortune of him showing me how to manipulate his situation, where you turn this knob to affect the attack and the decay, and this one for sustain and release, the ADRS system. Which then later, when the mini mode came out, which is what I used on the Cloud One stuff and the Universal Robot stuff, I was very comfortable programming them. It was like a second instrument to me, well, fourth, I guess, between playing the guitar, playing the piano, and so on and so forth. But an example of extreme usage is Black Ivory. On the Black Ivory album, on the single You and I, the French horn sounds on that record were made by the Mini Moog.
Oh, wow.
Matter of fact, several records, because brass musicians will tell you French horn is a very difficult instrument to play. You got to have a hell of a lip to play.